Today we're talking electoral disputes, something that we can trace back to the very founding of our nation. Today's a big day because Texas is suing Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin at the Supreme Court over election rules. And so we're going to discuss a little bit about voter fraud, and which is something that's been so ingrained in American politics from the very beginning. And I'll start off with a little fun fact. Cooping was a form of fraud in the 19th century in the U.S. And this was a practice in which gangs would kidnap a victim and force them to vote multiple times, often in disguises, and they would even force alcohol and drugs upon them. And interestingly, they believe Edgar Allan Poe may have died inadvertently due to cooping. So, of course, many of us all of us were not alive during that time. But a lot of us do remember the Bush administration, right? And this was something that the Democrats believed that Bush became president, fraudulently as well. And we have Thomas Spencer, who was a lawyer on the Bush versus Gore case in the year 2000. And vice president of the Lawyers Democracy Fund. He warned about the existence of a criminal underworld that perpetuates voter fraud, which he said, quote, "There's an underworld out there that trades on ballots and forgeries." He told PJ Media in an interview that they prey on old folks or people in very poor communities. It's a huge problem, and it's one of those subterranean problems where it's very difficult to find who those people are. So this is something that fair and honest elections is really not a partisan issue. We find those allegations on both sides. And it's such an integral part of a healthy democracy. I don't find any reason why we shouldn't be talking about this. You can go back to a previous podcast where we talked a little bit about how unique America is that in that it's built on this premise that the government didn't give us rights, right? We gave rights and limited rights at that to the government. So we are the masters, hypothetically. Our founders believed that the people should be the masters, and the government is servicing us in securing our individual rights, right? And of course, voting is our means of ensuring that the government authority is derived from us, the will of the people. So I really, again, hope that people are not seeing this as a left-right issue, but a constitutional issue. Just as we spoke endlessly of Russian involvement in the elections in 2016, which, by the way, I think this time around we got to include China and Iran in that in that list of countries who are meddling with our elections. We should all care about this. And even according to a poll done by Rasmussen, that they found that nearly a third of Democrats believe the election was stolen by Biden. And that should be really concerning, right? Because if the 2000 Bush elections taught us anything, is that such underlying beliefs can cast a really, really bad shadow, and in this case, on the Biden administration, right? So today's a really big day. We're recording on December 8th, and since the mainstream media declared Biden's win in early November, the Trump campaign has been trying to get to the Supreme Court. And trying to get the Supreme Court to intervene. And today might be the beginning of that whole cycle. We shall see. But of course, we hear from the mainstream media that, and they're experts, and they say that it's very unlikely that Trump will win. I also outlined that a little bit in episode 2 about what are the obstacles that are in Trump's way. But the mainstream media has stated that because the votes that were received after Election Day was really minimal in comparison to Joe Biden's lead in those ballots received after Election Day, right? That it's really not very feasible for Trump to win. Law expert Richard Hansen, the University of California, Irvine, said that unless something new happens, I don't see a viable path for Trump to litigate his way out of electoral college loss. Also, Florida State University law professor Michael Morley says something very similar, noting that Biden has several paths to victory. So we're going to see if that's true, right? And like we said, Texas is suing Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. and they filed a lawsuit directly with the U.S. Supreme Court shortly after midnight yesterday night, very late at night Monday. They're challenging the election procedures in those 4 states, stating that they violated the Constitution. So allegedly, what did they violate? The electors clause of the Constitution, because they made changes to voting rules and procedures through the courts or through executive actions, and not through the state legislatures, which is, and it should be only them who can make those changes. They're also arguing that there were differences in voting rules and procedures in different counties within the states, which violates the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause. I talk a little bit about those irregulars also in episode 2, so you should check that out. So the question is, did the defendant states violate the Electors Clause by taking non-legislative actions to challenge the election rules that would govern the appointment of presidential electors? The claim is they have violated Electors Clause of Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 of the U.S. Constitution. And the lawsuit says, quote, certain officials in the defendant states presented the pandemic as the justification for ignoring state laws regarding absentee and mail-in voting. The defendant states flooded their citizenry with tens of millions of ballot applications and ballot in derogation of statutory controls as to how they are lawfully received, evaluated, and counted. Whether well-intentioned or not, these unconstitutional acts had the same uniform effect. They made in the 2020 election. They made the 2020 election less secure in the defendant states. Those changes are inconsistent with relevant state laws and were made by non-legislative entities without any consent by the state legislatures. The acts of these officials thus directly violated the Constitution. So, if the Supreme Court were to agree with Texas, it can ultimately be outcome determinative if state legislatures had to pick new electors. Dun, dun, dun. So, this is, without a doubt, a very, very significant case, because if the court were to rule in favor of Texas, those 4 states would have their state legislatures determine the outcome, right? And pick the electors. Its original jurisdiction, which means that it wouldn't start at the district court level. Its original jurisdiction, which means it would start at the district court level. It would not start at the district court level, but the Supreme Court level. So states can sue other states for violation of law and claims they have in the Supreme Court. So, in my opinion, I don't think that there's any reason for the Supreme Court to not take the case, because it raises such pressing constitutional issues. The state is entitled to select electors pursuant to statutory rules set by state legislature, and in all those states we have elections contradicting their own statutory rules. And you also got Pennsylvania, which is Pennsylvania is particularly problematic because their Secretary of State, Kathy Boockvar, I hope I'm saying that right. It's spelled Boockvar. Allegedly, she illegally instructed county boards the evening before the election to identify voters whose ballots had been rejected, giving parties a chance to notify them and encourage them to vote in person using provisional ballots. So, so there's a lot. Today is really an important day. So, I just found out that the U.S. Supreme Court will be hearing Texas's lawsuit against Pennsylvania, Georgia, Michigan, and Wisconsin over the potential voter fraud. I wanted to speak a little bit about Pennsylvania, and because today Supreme Court Justice Alito moved up the court deadline to determine whether or not Pennsylvania violated their own state constitution and U.S. Constitution in the way they ran their elections. We talked about already, legislatures are the only ones who get to decide how elections are run. So in Pennsylvania, if they find that the attorney general, the governor, election officials changed the way it was run, that would be found unconstitutional. And we also found out, so today we found out that that case was thrown out. I think a lot of people who are convinced that there is voter fraud. They were a little dismayed by that decision. It was actually Alito who threw out the case, and he said it was in fear of opening up some sort of Pandora's box. Even if they can prove the U.S. constitutional violations, they are deciding not to. And in their statement, they stated no court has ever issued an order nullifying a governor's certification of presidential election results for good reason, because once the door is open to judicial invalidation of presidential election results, it will be hard to close that door again. The loss of public trust in constitutional order resulting from the exercise of that kind of judicial power would be incalculable. And in other breaking news, we have Louisiana now filing a lawsuit against 5 battleground states, in addition to Texas. Attorney General Jeff Landry stated, Louisiana citizens are damaged if elections in other states were conducted outside the confines of the Constitution while we obeyed the rules. And what's also developing right now is you have seven other states joining Texas. I mean, well, if you include Louisiana, that would be 7 other states: Arkansas, Alabama, Florida, Kentucky, Mississippi, South Carolina, and South Dakota is now joining Texas on this. So they're coming in fast and furious. So buckle up. It's going to be one crazy ride.